Good morning. Welcome to this Dharma talk. On Sunday. Pardon the throat clearing. The way I felt at 3 a.m, I didn't know if I would be here this morning, but here I am. Thanks to Xanax. See a few people smiling. Spelled with an X, you probably know. So it did help me get to sleep, and that's the important thing. Get to sleep. So this morning's Dharma talk title is Don't Receive. A little bit different than what you've been hearing me say if you've been listening, which I'm always saying over and over again: receive, whatever shows up, receive. But there's a time when you don't exactly receive. Of course, in order to do what this Dharma talk title is saying, don't receive, you have to be in the middle of receiving. You have to be in the middle of listening to someone, nodding your head perhaps. Might even be saying, I'm kind of following you, see what you're saying. Any number of things. But what I'm pointing at here is there are times when someone is talking to you and you're in the midst of receiving, you see that they're beginning to lie to you. Maybe not deliberately. Maybe they don't, maybe they think what they're saying is the truth, but you can see that, maybe you can't see it's an exact lie, but you can see that there's really no substance behind it's their opinion, their judgment, their evaluation that is there. Don't receive that. This doesn't mean say anything. You don't have to do anything. You're not required, as I teach this, or I'm encouraging you to do, is don't just assume that whatever someone says is the truth just because you received it. You might have to eat a lot of garbage before you see the truth. This is very difficult. The whole world is full of this crap. Start right now. Start right in your own life. Listen to everybody. Receive everything. It will not be easy, and it will probably get more and more difficult. This is why it's so necessary to have a place where you can go be by yourself, sit down, and return to your original integrity and your original intention to see the truth no matter what. Don't believe your own thoughts, don't believe anybody else's, and also don't push them away, which is another kind of belief called disbelief. You don't need to do any of that. Of course, if you don't believe, you don't disbelieve, and you don't ignore, that is very threatening to that part of the consciousness that is curled up in a coil of distrust, a paranoia called ego. Seventh consciousness, according to the Yogacara tradition. Study it. Go look at it closely. This has been studied for centuries and centuries. This is not something somebody thought up last week, including this old person. Find out who you are. Look at your identity from me or anyone else. You find out. I can give you the tools right now. Sit down, hold still, watch your mind stream without comment. And if you do comment, then just watch that. Difficult area because you're listening to someone that for the last 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, you've been very friendly with, you had a good time with, and suddenly they seem to be going into a dynamic where it seems a little shaky what they're saying to you. I'm not saying you should say, do you have proof? This is not a law office or something. Not that you couldn't do that, but I'm not giving you a standard for putting someone on the spot. I'm saying just receive, but be very tentative about what happens in your mind as you're listening. Be very, very generous with your attention. Listen to them, even though they're saying something about someone you know that is really has no basis, but seems to be coming out of their need to cover something up with their opinions, ideas, judgments, and so on. Difficult area. And you can't correct it. And if you do anything with it, then you're defending, or you're being defensive or whatever. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's just an incredible labyrinth of difficulty. So don't receive. And as I said before, I'll go through it again. That doesn't mean you're stopping something. It just means that you don't have the general idea of just receive everything is just to be open, listen, smell, taste, touch, hear, think, feel, remember. Don't forget that one. Just receive the memories. Don't validate them. Don't validate a memory because it's supportive to you. And also don't validate a memory because it somehow supports your negative feelings about another person. Don't do it. Don't do anything with it. Receive everything. Unless you don't receive. And this is a very specific way of talking about it. So if you have some questions in a moment, I'd like to address those. Because it's not something you can actually figure out or calculate or come up with an idea or strategy or protocol or standard for it. It's something that has to be done with the consciousness. So you're there, excuse me, you're listening, person is talking about this, talking about that, and then maybe coming into an area that seems like they don't really have anything other than their feelings, their emotions, their reactions to support the particular what may be opinions or ideas or judgments of anybody. Be very careful about that. People want support. If they have a lot of negative feelings that they're not willing to look at, and they're covered up, they're going to look around for somebody that feels the same way, or at least try to get somebody to feel that way when they tell their story. Yeah, we all know what this is. Been around for as long as we've been here. This doesn't mean at all that you shouldn't be receiving as much as possible. Receive everything everybody says. Be very, very respectful to everyone's clarity and their confusion. But when I say don't receive, even that is not exactly what I'm endeavoring to point out. I'm just, before we came in here, I thought several don't receive. When should we receive? Is there a time when we should? All kinds of too long titles, but I think don't receive is a pretty good one to get your attention, especially if you've been listening to me. Don't receive. But I don't mean that there will be a time when you're going to shut it off so much as don't receive in the sense of just giving everything a pass. Anything gets to come through the gate because we're supposed to receive. So that's where it gets very, very difficult when we're trying to live up to a standard of being a receiver. This slowly migrates in from the consciousness that is receiving to the identity that wants to be a receiver. This is ego. Not wrong, needs to be seen, needs to be acknowledged that you are looking for a credential rather than the truth. Take some questions if there are some. Yes.
Kabbaling, if we don't receive, what happens? Does anything happen within our attention that we're giving to the person?
So when I'm saying that, I know I'm not saying, I can't think of another title for it other than that, for the talk, but actually I'm not even saying stop it altogether, like don't receive. I don't mean that. I'm just saying continue to receive, but be very very aware of the tendency to want to believe what you're hearing. I want to assume that whatever you're being told is the truth without any if you go into that whole area, no proof for that. It's just someone's interpretation, someone's conclusion, someone operating out of hope and fear rather than out of what is actually happening or has happened. More?
Kabbaling, then if we're giving the person the benefit of the doubt,
Yeah.
Is there a beginning or end to that?
No. Yeah, the ego loves beginnings and ends, because then you can say, well, this time, but they use this, they look this way, or use this kind of a word, or use this kind of then we can get some control over it. If you're doing that, if you understand what I'm saying, if you're listening to it, and the next time you get in a situation where you're being pushed down a little bit in an area that you think feels a little suspicious, the feeling of not knowing is probably the best security blanket you're going to have as far as the truth. You just don't know. That's openness, but the just don't know may be ego's language for that. Consciousness doesn't have any language for that. Go ahead.
Kabbaling, if we are looking at that, and do we need to look at some kind of motive? Bowing,
Say more.
bowing, it seems like we might see somebody, if you're saying we're looking and we see that there's something fishy about what they're saying. It seems like a motive might show up that we want to grasp onto. Do we need to do anything with that?
Do anything. It's, you're just having some insight about that. But you wouldn't necessarily do anything with it. Like accuse them of it or bring that up. It looks to me like you're trying to do this, or this. I can say it very simply, and this should bring up 5 or 10 questions anyway. Do not have a conversation with someone like this. Listen, ask questions, consider what's being said, but don't converse. Don't analyze, don't go into that jungle of that person's mind. Because in the jungle, the unexamined area of your own mind gets magnetized by that. Next thing you know, you're not only dealing with their confusion, you're dealing with your own confusion. You cannot see this unless you have a lot of sitting meditation. You're not going to differentiate between, this is called discriminating awareness wisdom. It sees the differences between things, but it doesn't buy into this, and it doesn't sell that. It makes no choices. It doesn't need to, because the fundamental understanding is nothing is separate. Yet the illusion of separation is intense, and it has huge claws pulling you into it, or it has huge boxing gloves pushing away from it. More.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful. Are you basically pointing at when we're receiving someone and we affirm them or validate what they're saying by our receiving?
Some, if you're listening, quite often someone will, if you're listening to them, and you just are just listening and listening and listening, then quite often, if you're not saying anything about it, a person just feels like you're agreeing with them. Not always. They might ask that what you see them saying, or you understand, or they might be question you, but they might also just feel like you agree. And sometimes all you'd have to do is say, "Oh, that sounds terrible." That is, you might come back with something they said. That's horrible. But you may not come in and say, "How do you know that? How do you know that that's true? Is that true? What you just said?" That may be something that, depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on your dynamic with that person for the last 6 months or 6 years, all the things that have gone by are going to show up in your consciousness with that interaction. And you'll know to what, if you do it with consciousness, not with thinking or analysis, you'll know whether you should say anything at all or keep it zipped. Yes.
Wonderful. Are you saying that we can receive and at some point know that it's best to receive with a question, asking a question?
That would be a better way than I said it, probably, saying you're receiving, but a question about what just came into your palate, came into your ears, is, you just said this, can you say more about that? Why does that seem so convincing to you? So you could interact in a conversational way, but just be very cautious of getting into the conversation that hooks your unexamined bullshit and enhances theirs. I'm sure you all have a little bit of a feeling what I'm saying there. It's very difficult to do that. Even with a really good therapist, you can get stuck in that area. Isn't that true? A really good therapist. Go ahead.
Wonderful. It seems like that's what you're pointing at is the either like you're both saying take more responsibility in the interaction with somebody who is saying things that are just uncomfortable or don't seem to be true.
What's your question?
I guess my question is how do we know when to step in.
You probably won't know as some kind of a preamble where you know that's going to happen, but you'll know if you're just receiving and you're not supporting, you're not defending, you're not analyzing, not doing anything but receiving, then you will know. There'll be a time when your own sensitivity, especially if you've been looking at your own mind stream for many years, you'll know when something is, what's the fancy word there, fishy. Something about it is, it looks like somebody's trying to put on a stage play or something, trying to convince you of something. Well,
Wonder why, I guess I'm also, having been involved in some of these conversations, or I can identify with I think what you're pointing at, it can devolve into I don't know, an argument or
oh my gosh,
us
yes.
versus they. us
I've been,
versus
that's
they.
how I know about this. I've been in it myself. I've been attacked by this and this and this and it's so startling, I just start to defend myself. I think this is untrue. But it's not a good idea to do that. It just creates more warfare. As I've said many times, I could not do this if I were just as crazy as you guys, or as anybody I talk to. Could not do this if I'd somehow become some kind of a higher being who was all whatever, looking down from on high and helping people fix themselves. It's actually more powerful than that. It's consciousness only. There's no self there. There's no one who's hurt. There's no one who's hurting. There's no praise, no blame anywhere. This is, to realize this is just, I don't know, what's the fancy thing, mind blowing? It's just amazing, but you have to realize it. Don't believe anything I'm saying. I lie constantly. Go ahead.
SokukoJi, are we receiving an illusion?
Yes,
Is it like receiving a lie all of the time?
all the time.
So what is our obligation within receiving a lie all of the time?
Just receive it. Your obligation is to just receive it. What I'm trying to point out, when I say don't receive, there's going to be times when there's a bunch of anger and violence coming your way. That somebody is trying to get you to join their political party. Then you might interact with them a little bit around that. Trying to get an agreement from you so they can continue to go in circles and blame. That's all I'm saying. The whole thing is an illusion, but the realization of that is there won't be any polarity. There won't be any this or that. It's beyond that. Yes.
Elena bowing. Is it also an illusion because everything's coming out of everyone's own perception and view and?
There's a way of talking about it, but it's fundamentally, this is unreal. But fundamentally, the hardest thing you can find, the most solid, dependable piece of granite that's been around for centuries. Unreal. It's not that it's not solid, that's part of the illusion. But to go back to what you said, yes, that's an indicator of it, to see that people are using the very illusion which they're agreeing with, or objecting to, or ignoring to suit their own desires, passion, aggression, ignorance. The 12 links. 6, 7, 8, 9 on the contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and then it goes to becoming, or the next thing that's going to happen. It's about observing that, not about being snagged by it. If you observe it, you might feel like you're being snagged, but the awareness of that, it won't exactly pull you into the becoming and to changing into something else altogether. More?
No, thank you.
Shadow bowing.
Oh, you,
Shanjian going,
John Jen.
what's the difference between don't receive on one hand and ignoring and rejecting on the other?
Don't receive is coming out of receiving. So don't receive is you've been receiving, and all of a sudden you notice that there's been some flowers, there've been some a pile of sawdust coming in, and then suddenly over here, there's something right in the middle of this, there's a snake right there. And so you're not separating, it's just another item, but you're very curious about that snake. So you're going to not necessarily receive that in the sense that you would the sawdust. All right, I'm just using a bunch of vague different, but the snake symbolizes something threatening. So you're going to notice that, but you wouldn't even see it if you were just ignoring and shutting down. You wouldn't even know the snake was there because your style is just I'm not accepting anything. Operating on what most of society is doing, just operating on fear, staying with their society, staying with their beliefs, staying with their, and just totally protected from any otherness or any real deep understanding of what consciousness is. More?
Not so.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Not Sumi bowing. Is there a relationship between don't receive and watching productions that come out of an intention to receive?
When I say don't receive, I'm speaking more of something along the line of that area, that if you're receiving, then you'll notice when something comes up that has fishy smell to it, something just doesn't, there's too much passion, aggression, and ignorance showing up in that is personalized in such a way that it's somehow been, what's the common term these days, weaponized to destroy somebody or hurt somebody. And so you may take exception to that. You may receive it, but you also may question that. You may go right into that and bring out more information about it. So I see you're saying this or this. Could you say more about? You might even be respectful. You might pacify it. You might pass rather than just destroy it right away. You might pass it. Say, that's interesting. You would say that. So I can tune into that a little bit. But could you say more about why you feel like what she said was that destructive, or that was, or you feel like that was disrespectful, or something? You could bring it out a little bit. Now go back to the last part of your question.
It's gone.
That's why I asked you.
But it seems like is there a quality of creating space by doing the don't receive?
A little bit, but I would make a comment on that, and I would say we don't really create space, because space is already the case. What we do with our craziness and our fear, we fill it up with our ideas, our beliefs, our opinions, our judgments, including in Buddhism. Buddhism is full of all kinds of fillers, where we fill stuff up with ideas and beliefs and precepts, and we tie into those and lock down on those, so we don't really see the vast openness of being. Not trying to be particularly romantic, but it is an open dimension, which there are no persons, there's just consciousness only, which belongs to no one. That's what this person is trying to help you see. And for you, it might be very, very scary if you get close to that. I don't know what kind of karma you're working with. They could be threatening. So that's why you, or I certainly needed a teacher. Anyone needs a teacher. So when you get to that part where it starts to get just a little bit too difficult, that person possibly could come in and give you a little bit of a boost. More.
Not right now. Thank you.
Shoto.
Shoto bowing. I want to know, or I want to go into and ask around lying. In particular, you brought up one side of it where somebody doesn't have proof. But then I want to know about the lie in the proof. Like someone does have the perception, they did see something happen, but then they peddle that around as truth. How is that still a lie, bowing?
I don't know. It's just such a three-ring circus going on. There's so many variables in there that it's very difficult to go in and pull it apart and dissect it and deconstruct it in such a way that we can get anywhere with it. So I'm not saying you can't, or I'm not saying a scholar couldn't, or a psychologist, or perhaps, but I'm not, don't have the mental acumen to be able to deconstruct that in such a way that could possibly be helpful. I'm pointing directly to what I'm looking at. I teach, as I said, for years, what I teach is I'm looking at it. I'm actually looking at anybody that sits in front of me, I'm looking at it. Not because I'm reading your mind, or I don't need to read your mind. There isn't anything separate from this, and it's entirely mind. There are no separate minds. But sometimes we think so. Brian,
Brian Butler is not receiving simply perhaps receiving the quality of or a quality of the snake in the sawdust, or responding to that.
perhaps, to continue to use that same image that I kind of invented, to some extent. It's so individual, so personal, and has to do with what that whole sawdust and snake represent as images, but just less is better, unless it's about receiving, and in which case anything that's showing up that's moving towards you, open wide, receive. But if you see something that is, there's all kinds of images I can invent here, that something is just too threatening or something, or too challenging, or it isn't quite clear, then you might stop right there and say, if it's a person or if it's a situation, depends on what it is, say, what about this? Let's go deeper into that before I just go along with what you're saying. Very situational. No, there's no standard for it that's going to work. And it's all over the place. Everybody's experiencing this off and on all day long with just interacting with anyone. We listen to people talk, and they have their ideas and beliefs, and we try to be as respectful and kind as we can. Yes, so
Shoto bowing. I'd like to try to ask my question a little more simply. I'm looking at that idea of eyewitness, and eyewitnesses are, I understand, not actually very trustworthy. And I'm wondering why that is. Like, why is seeing something still not, why is an eyewitness not trustworthy? Bowing.
So generally, anyone who's seeing something is not only seeing what's in front of them, they're seeing what they think is in front of them. And so therefore the tendency to project, and there's no way to go in and delaminate that and say you might have 15 projections on top of somebody, anything from their ethnicity to their sexual orientation, to what they said to you 3 days ago, or to aspects of their situation where you've never seen them before, you've never talked to them before, and something shows up, and the only thing you have to go by is your state of mind at the time might be projecting, how you're feeling might be projecting, because we do not want to be responsible for how we feel. So we may project it on anything that shows up that doesn't have any characters or characteristics or qualities to it, other than as a form there, or someone is using a garden rake or something and saying something across the fence, some kind of a small melodrama going on there. The tendency to project onto it is really strong, and quite often, not always, but quite often it's based on what we've been trying to hold down in our mind, because we don't want to feel that way. But here's something that's triggering that. So now we get to take what we don't want to look at and project it onto that, just because it has some kind of frequency, some kind of resonance that pulls that out of us. This is happening with everybody all the time. We're not separate beings. The illusion of being a separate being is just astonishingly convincing. The whole world is doing this. We're just driving ourselves crazy. We're killing each other. And even the people who are have some kind of relative sanity, they are actually approaching those parts of society that are obviously insane, more obviously, and they're approaching it with the same kind of insanity. So it just causes what? War. It has to be another way of doing that. And how that's done, I don't know. I have no magical formula. Yes.
Elena bowing. When people say things out of anger, and maybe there's a little bit of truth and maybe there's a little bit of lie, how do we work with trusting again?
So I say don't trust anybody. Don't trust me. Don't believe me. Don't trust me. Don't trust anybody. Not a good idea. You don't need that. You don't need an elbow to lean on, or you don't need a countertop to lean on. You don't need it. Just don't trust anybody. Just receive. More if you want it.
Elena bowing. My understanding is that trust is the foundation of all relationships.
Who told you that?
Society.
Okay. Well, You can use that, but how is that working? Look at society. It's just a mess. I mean, not saying there aren't some areas of it that are very reasonable and trustworthy, so to speak. It's so incredibly relative, and it's the fundamental nature of trustworthiness is not trustworthy. It's based on belief. It's based on believing somebody so far has not done this, done that, so therefore they're trustworthy. Now, I'm not saying that I don't occasionally use that and feel I can trust. Just because it always happens. I can trust that this will happen and that will happen because it's been happening for years and years. So that kind of trust is more, and not so much about trust, it's just about repetition, just a convention. I trust that, or I believe that the sun's gonna come up. It's always done that. But what if someday the sun decided, I'm not gonna come up? In other words, what would that mean? The earth stopped turning. Or it started turning this way. I mean, I'm being silly, but I'm just saying, look very closely at the whole idea of trust. The trust implies and regenerates and reinforces and substantiates the belief, the hidden belief, that there's someone here who can trust something over there. This is called duality. This is an ancient teaching going back to before the Buddha, to the Upanishads, to the Chandogya Upanishad, saying there isn't anything else. There's just this. There's consciousness. It's just consciousness. You can see this. It's possible for you to see this, but you may have to spend the rest of your life looking at your consciousness without adding, looking at your consciousness. And that means whatever rises in it. The thought about what you're going to have for supper. Just watch what happens and comes and goes. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide. Just receive. Unless you don't.
Yes, Elena bowing. If we don't trust people, doesn't that perpetuate self-sufficiency and like, why do we need,
Did you hear me say don't trust people?
if we don't trust anything?
Did you hear me say that?
I thought so.
Yeah, I probably did. But what I'm saying that it's hard to talk in relative terms and convey something that is not about a position. So I'm saying, don't trust, don't distrust, the same way of saying, don't believe, but don't disbelieve. Take no position, which is also a kind of position. That ego will make use of that. That's like, that's like health food for ego. Something they can not trust anything. So don't trust, don't distrust, don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't take no position on anything, so you can eventually see what this is fundamentally. This is the only place I can point to is right here. It seems to be in this area of the heart mind. Not the blood pumping mechanism, but something about this area of the body seems to have to do with consciousness, even though it's an aspect or part of the body. Consciousness has no location. Consciousness is 3 feet out in front of me on the floor right there. Everybody put their consciousness right there. Don't look at it, just put your consciousness there. What changed? Anything?
Elena bowing. I think maybe my perceptions about things are making it difficult for me to receive.
That's awareness.
And I feel like if I don't trust or depend on other people, like, wouldn't that just make me an island? Like, why would I pursue friendships?
See, what you do is you take those ideas and you immediately leave what you just talked about and go to some kind of result. It's the very nature of relative truth. It's the very nature of this illusion that has us all believing in this astonishing propaganda that you have to do this, you have to believe this, you have to trust this, you don't have to do anything. That's the mundane path you're talking about. If you're listening to me, what I'm pointing at is a spiritual path. You will have no reference point. You don't need one. Not that I don't need to get out of bed and go to the restroom, or not that I don't need to find out where my robe is at, or ask Ondo where it's at, or count on you to help me with this or that, just like you've been helping with different things. So we have those reference points, but you don't have to trust them. Don't load anything up with your preconceptions, your presumptions, or your expectations. That's the fancy word. Expectations are just, because if you have that expectation, what happens with that Because then we don't realize it, we thought we're being respectful to what we're expecting. But actually, we're making assumptions about what that, maybe if it's another person, what they're having to deal with, totally discounting the karma that's 3 inches behind their mind stream from 5 lifetimes ago that needs to come out and needs to express itself. You don't have any choice about this. I apologize for yelling, but I can't help it. I'm not bullying you. I don't think so, but if you think I am, then this may be too difficult information for you. I'm just saying it's so important to realize this, otherwise we're just going in circles our whole life, believing our thoughts, disbelieving our thoughts, going this way, going that way, liking this person, disliking that person. It's really, really difficult. But you don't have to do that. You can actually live in an open dimension of being beyond expectation. That doesn't mean you won't, to put it bluntly, won't give a shit what's gonna happen, but you will not be too concerned about what's happening because your insight into the fundamental nature of this, pratitya samutpada, dependent origination, will go way beyond your own particularity, your own picking and choosing. You see deeply into the nature of trees, sky, oceans, fish. You see what this is in its entirety. So it's not important what if someone lives up to something. They're just doing the best that they can to deal with the karma that arises day by day by day in their mind stream. Sometimes they may not be able to live up to something they said they would do. You follow me a little bit? Put them before yourself. If you can just, this is the bodhisattva path, put others before yourself. That's something you're considering doing. Receiving Jukai, you have to put others before yourself, because if you put yourself before others, you're going to believe your thoughts and you're going to blame others for how you feel. This has been happening to me a lot recently, blaming me for how people feel, even though they have evidence, because I'm being mean or bossy. More? Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderbang, it seems in some ways with this talk, you're telling or asking us to look at the reference point we've made out of receiving. Your teaching of receiving everything. Is
Yes.
that true?
Well, yes, you need to be aware of everything. Receiving is a teaching, observing is a teaching, but if you're starting to lock down on that and think, well, I just have to receive, then even the dirt balls that are coming at you from someone who usually is throwing chrysanthemums at you, suddenly they're, because of their dynamic, because of what they ran into 3 weeks ago, or 3 days ago, they're starting to spew out things that don't look so good, but yet they're able to justify why that's happening because some particular situation they're going through. So we tend to not give them the benefit of the doubt, but believe what they're saying. I'm not saying when you give someone the benefit of the doubt, you don't necessarily believe what they're saying. But you might consider it more.
Wonderbang, is it too much to say that you're basically asking us to take responsibility? And when we're with someone, it's not just receiving. There's more responsibility to receiving than just listening. Is that true?
Say more.
Ondo bowing. I guess what I want to say is, are you asking us to be more responsible in our receiving?
Yes, you're already responsible, but to acknowledge that you're responsible. You can cover up the responsibility, but you don't have to accept responsibility. I'm not talking about praise and blame. I say you are responsible for everything. This is your world. This is yours. All of this is yours. If you see this, every person is yours. If you see this, you won't fight with anyone anymore. This doesn't mean that you're going to let someone punch you. But you really realize how not separate, nothing is separate from anything else. It's an astonishing realization. And the warfare just tapers off. Might not come to an end depending on the karma you personally are dealing with, but it just begins to taper off so that you a lot less warlike, a lot less looking for results. I've got to get this to happen. I need to control this or that.
Wonderbang, I'm having a hard time holding not separate that someone else is not separate. And yet not just receiving, or looking at receiving as not just listening.
What's the question?
What responsibility do we have when to someone else who is lying when they're not separate from us?
Well, it's situational, but if you can see that someone's inventing things or loading things up or trying to reinforce their positionality or their opinions or ideas, just go slow. If you're already listening to them, you already have, they have your attention, you have their attention, you can interact with them in that area. But you don't necessarily have to believe what they're saying and sympathize with them. This doesn't mean that you can't be understanding and considerate about what they're going through with the things they're believing in. One of the ways I'm not giving you a formula here, but one of the things I've said, you notice something really difficult coming this way that you think it's kind of baseless, or there's something else going on that you don't understand the reason for it, you can acknowledge this sounds really difficult for you, rather than immediately jump into what proof have you got for that. You don't have to do that. That person doesn't need that kind of help. They don't need to be argued with, but they also don't need to be agreed with. Much more difficult for you or me or for any of us to listen to somebody who's going this way or that way without stepping in and endeavoring to adjust them or correct them, and just let them do it, say whatever they're doing, make whatever statements they're making without necessarily reinforcing that. It's going to show up so many different ways. The basic idea here of the teaching that I am endeavoring to say is go slow in that area. Be very sensitive to what you're receiving. Like a snake in the sawdust. Showed up.
I'd like to ask maybe a personal paraphrase where I think Ondo's asking, is our personal confusion and clarity influencing what we're hearing just by being there? Bowing.
So there's your personal confusion and clarity is not separate from anything, but it's separated out insofar as you feel or think or assume or conclude that you're a separate being with separate this, separate karma, separate. You're separated for sure. I wave my hand, your hand doesn't move. There's lots of convincing things that tell us, well, I'm over here. This is why some people are locked up in prison or are kidnapped off on the streets and sent to other countries. But it's just because of the intense polarization that makes us feel that there's some of us are really good and privileged and some of us are really bad and need to be locked up, punished, or have all their rights taken away. It's astonishing. So we're in a situation where we can look at that more closely, but it's very tentative to, or very not tentative, but very very seductive in that area to get pulled in, because it gives a safety net for ego. Ego, if you can find a position where you're right, somebody else is wrong or incorrect, it just protects you up to a point, and then at some point, or maybe many points, that's going to start to come apart. Not going to be easy. More?
Yes, a slightly different area. I'm looking at or asking about when we do have those cultural conditions, like I learned this from my grandma or learned this in school, when we're trying to be a Buddhist, should we replace those concepts with Buddhist ones? Bowing.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. Sounds quite silly, but go ahead.
So, like that issue with trust, like you don't teach trust, but we're bringing that from our conditioning. We
Yes.
think that that's a valuable thing we're conditioned to. So we meet a Buddhist concept that says don't trust anything. Should we try to align ourselves with the Buddhist concept there? Bowing.
You should do it with your own insight, your own intelligence. If you still feel like you need to use that, then you should. It's just about being aware of it So if you still, like with Elena, if you still feel like you have to, that she has to trust you, you know, I wouldn't trust you, but it feels like you have to trust you. You can go ahead and do that. But I guess what I'm saying beyond that, it's just an open dimension where you fundamentally care about somebody and you care about consciousness and you care about others. You're putting others before yourself. You can start out with the relationship you're in. That will be the most challenging one, to put that person before yourself. Oh, that's a hard one. Especially if that person is all smoke and mirrors. So if that person is all kind of confusion, that they keep validating one thing, at the same time they're doing something else right around the corner, trying to appear this way, but you know they're really doing this over here, functioning in a different way, just some kind of deception going on. So that's a difficult area to trust, but if you just give people the benefit of the doubt and realize they're dealing with difficulty too, then maybe it won't show up to trust, but at least you're giving them some space to be who they are and live with the karma that is developing in their life, rather than holding them to some kind of standard of trust. Which that's not only not helping them, it's not helping you. But you need to look at what is this whole trust situation. Again, like I said, if you want to use that, go ahead and use it. Just be aware that you have a particular trust dynamic that you're using to support, to give you some security around that area.
Total bowing. Is there anything to the phrase "trust a thief to steal"? Bowing.
Trust what?
Trust a thief to steal. Bowing.
Nah, that's just a dumbass compliment. Yeah. Trust it. No, that's because there's gonna be a time when the thief doesn't steal. I'm a thief. I don't steal. But I've never stopped being a thief from the time I was born. I've been stealing ever since I was born. Very difficult karma to come in with and deal with and feel shame about it and not be able to correct it or do anything. The only thing I've done is not even correcting it. I just don't take what is not given. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't find somebody. If you followed me around for the last week and say, remember that hardware store you were in? Those are not your pliers. And it's interesting, if I go in a hardware store, I look at how unprotected everything is. Can't help it. I was doing that in the Ben Franklin store in 1952 when I stole a rubber monkey. I don't have it anymore, so. So we have to be responsible for what's happening. You don't have to fix yourself. You don't have to change. If you're really responsible for what this is, then you realize that all the causes and conditions that rise as your activity or your desire or your passion, aggression, ignorance, you don't have to fix that. If you start fixing things, ego gets nutrition from that accomplishment mentality. Don't have to do it. See everything as unreal. You can do that.
Total bowing.
That's true.
One last one. What do you mean? One of your teachings is to trust the space. What is it to trust the space? Bowing.
The space is very trustworthy. It never changes, doesn't do anything. It's just space. So you can, if you trust the space, it's like if you're doing sitting meditation, you're sitting symmetrical, you're holding still, and whatever rises in your mind stream is just a pack of lies, usually of sorts. It's right, it's wrong, it shouldn't be, that came, then that showed up, and then that went away, then this really felt good, and then that felt bad. But the space in which that occurs doesn't do anything. And so the idea here is, through the sitting practice of meditations, you're training your mind through studying these astonishing teachings, 2,500-year-old teachings of the Buddha's Dharma. You can actually, you could say, for lack of a better word, even though nothing happens, if something happens, then it isn't fundamentally the truth. But it's like changing your allegiance over from the things that show up in the mind stream of the consciousness or the world over to the space in which they occur. Your mind is like the sky. Clouds may come and go. They do not leave a mark on the sky. The sky does not appear. It cannot disappear. Simply put, but put in such a way that doesn't allow us to do much thinking about it. This is why the awareness practice is so powerful.
Milka bowing in the area that Ono was asking about, listening and don't receive. Is there a way, or would it be important in that situation to bring in some of the other senses to see whether we are receiving or need to receive bowing?
Maybe perhaps a little bit. Somewhat. I wouldn't make a project out of it. If you do that just by just flashing on that, I would think that'd be appropriate, but don't set up a structure for it. Too easy for that to develop into materialism, accomplishing, getting somewhere.
Milka bowing within the listening, what is there anything you would suggest we listen to bowing?
Sounds. Squeaking mice. Mice. Did you ever see a mice eat your head?
Not yet.
It's coming. I know because Coco told us.
I
You know Coco?
don't.
I don't either yet. She's only 3 and she can't drive yet. Yes.
Milka bowing, I have a question from YouTube from Tyler. Sokuzan, I want to ask you respectfully, why aren't you a Buddha?
Why aren't I a Buddha?
Yes.
I didn't say I wasn't Buddha. There isn't anything that isn't a Buddha, but you have to see it. If it's a claim, then there's a little suspicious there. I'm the Buddha. But you may have to be a Buddha if you're going to help people. Because if you're putting others before yourself, you have your own personality or your own has to slide into the background. Has to fade into the sky. Otherwise you can't help anybody. Because you're too concerned about how you look or what people will think if you act a certain way. It's concerned about your reputation. If I go into the way your question sounds, I would say there isn't anything that isn't the Buddha. But claiming you're the Buddha that's a relative statement about something that really can't be expressed. There's an ancient teaching called, you may have to be a 16-foot golden Buddha. That doesn't mean you're going to appear that way, but you may have to think of yourself that way in order to serve others. Do I do that? No, I don't.
Milka bowing, what would that mean to be a 16-foot golden Buddha?
No self. No self, no solid, no desire for this, no desire for that. Don't even care if you keep living or not. Don't need anything. This doesn't mean you're not hungry and eat some cereal. Doesn't mean that you don't need to go for a walk or exercise or something, but no fundamental grasping. There's desire, but no grasping. Big difference between the desire or the feeling and then the desire and the grasping. All the grasping is about serving others. The desire is just something that happens with human beings.
Milka bowing. It seems like a golden Buddha seems, I could get wrapped up in the pride of that. Is there?
That's not a 16-foot golden Buddha you're getting wrapped up in the pride. Yeah.
So what is that when I see the pride creeping?
It's just a way, it's just saying that it's hard for you to think of yourself that way because you probably have some shame in the area of your mind that won't allow you to be that idealistic on behalf of others. If you're doing it on behalf of others and know that there's no self, but you know that you're dealing with people who are intensely attached to a self that can win, attached that can lose, attached that can, a self that can live or die, be right or be wrong, if you're attached to that, it'll be difficult. Well, it's about what? Not getting rid of the attachment, not being detached. Not just let go. No, it's looking at the attachment. Look at the way in which we're attached. And there's no guarantee that that'll come apart. But it's unlikely to, the attachment is unlikely to less lighten its grip without being observed. It needs to be observed. Then there's a possibility that can come apart. Independent origination. In the causes and conditions that cause anything to show up as a particular thing. More.
No, thank you.
Unterbowing. How do we see? I guess I want to understand, or I want to know. That when we're in conversation with people, how to see that we need to step out beyond the comfort zone of just receiving.
I think it's very much a situation. I think I follow what you're saying. Might have to actually take exception to something that someone is saying. Is that what you're referring to? I just think that'll come out of a strong sitting practice and being responsible. When I say responsible, receiving whatever shows up in your own mind stream. If you're fighting with parts of your own mind stream, then it's likely that that fight will carry over into your interaction with others because they're not really separate from you. But there's no formula for that. And the way you ask the question shows that it's quite variable. It's just all over. But just that you can ask the question tells me that you're aware of how that is showing up. Or you wouldn't be able to ask that question. I would say that shows me that you're aware of that.
Unterbowing, what comes up for me is that I'm never going to be objective about this mind.
You don't need to be objective about it. Who told you that?
To be able to step out and not just receive. I need to be aware of how my own judgment is clouding my receiving.
That sounds good. But subjectivity, objectivity, subject and object, this and that, you and me, these are not separate from each other. So you can't separate it out and be objective about something. That just creates more tension, more warfare. It may look very civilized when you're doing it. And as a therapist, you may be able to validate that through your practice as a therapist. Working with a different chemistry set there. Chemistry set we're working with here doesn't even have a container, let alone chemicals. You follow me a little bit? Kind of using silly images, but you can't figure it out. Can't get the right combination of things to be objective.
Unterbowing, seems like this talk is all about reference points.
Yes.
And I want to say, how do we see our reference points? How do we see us just receiving as a standard?
If you just receive and you don't do anything with what you're receiving, this doesn't mean you might not see that you turn to that silly example of sawdust with a snake in it. Doesn't mean that you won't see that, but your discriminating awareness in that is very precise. You can see, not judging, you're just noticing that this is a dangerous area, that this is a threatening area, and this other is bland or neutral. So you notice that. You may or may not do something with it. In the sense of receiving something like that, you may point it out and say, what about this area here? Do you have any Is there any substance to that? How, where is that coming from? So you could inquire that way, which would be receiving it, but also backing that if the person's saying something, if that's what happens to be the case, kind of backing them in and saying, let's see more about why the snake needs to be there. A little bit more about the causes and conditions. Since we live in a relative world, we have to relate to it as it is. But it's very difficult to just suddenly think our way into non-duality, no self, no other, no life, no death. This has to be seen through consciousness, and to work with other people who are completely swamped by their opinions, neurosis, and so on. It's very challenging to do that.
Wonder bowing, it seems like another thing that you've been pointing at is our responsibility.
Question?
Same question. How do we see our responsibility?
Just by awareness. Everything we're talking about here, we can think about it all we want, but if you're not doing sitting meditation practice, this is not going to show up. You need to do a lot of the sit down, hold still, and sharpen, for lack of a better way of saying it, the relative thing, almost like sharpening a blade. Sit down and sharpen this blade of prajna, so that when you get up with that blade and go into your everyday life, you are not fooled by anything. You're not fooled into think there is a this or that, or right and a wrong. You see it, and the ego mind is dismayed by that. The ego mind wants right and wrong. It wants to know who's right. And if it's really suffering and it can't really find someone to blame, then it might look around and just create something. It's so painful to look here and feel guilty or to feel threatened. This is why it's so important to meditate a lot. We spend an hour, well, more than an hour today talking about this, but I'm encouraging all of you to use this room or use the Zoom, come in, sit still a lot. Sit still a lot. Even a Naveed who lives in Iran, long ways away, still joins us on occasion, sits with us. So we do this as a Sangha, as a community, and everyone's welcome to do this. You're welcome to come here and join us and sit, practice, train, stretch the awareness, train the awareness, use the awareness by watching the movement of the mind, not picking and choosing. The rest of your life, you might be picking and choosing all day long, probably, but while you're sitting, you have the opportunity to just, instead of doing this, separating, that's the mudra of the current regime, separate. This is the mudra that we have. Everything is simple, it's right here. You can do that. It's possible for you to do that. Thank you so much.